The morning watchful eyes. The city was just beginning to stir as the subway rumbled beneath its concrete veins. The early morning light struggled to pierce the layers of smog clinging to the skyline. It was a quiet time. A pause before the day's chaos erupted. Lance Corporal Liam Carter, dressed in civilian clothes, sat at the edge of a near-empty subway station, his sharp gaze idly sweeping the platform. Despite the calm, his instincts remained sharp, the result of years of military discipline. Liam wasn't in uniform today, but the rigid posture and the way his eyes methodically assessed his surroundings revealed his identity. After a grueling 48 hours spent attending the funeral of his best friend, a fellow Marine who succumbed to PTSD and overdose, Liam was heading back to base. He felt a heavy ache in his chest, both from grief and a gnawing guilt. The burden of not having seen the signs in his comrade weighed heavily on him. The subway station was practically deserted. There were only 3 others waiting on the platform: a businessman engrossed in his phone, a middle-aged man holding the hand of a small blonde girl, and a tired-looking janitor cleaning the floor. Liam's gaze landed on the man and the child. Something didn't sit right with him. The man was dressed casually, in a denim jacket and jeans. His body language seemed composed at first glance, but the grip he had on the girl's wrist wasn't what Liam would call paternal. The girl, probably 6 or 7, wore a bright school uniform with a too large backpack hanging from her tiny frame. Her small hands clutched a doll, its arm bent awkwardly against her chest. Her posture screamed discomfort, and her wide blue eyes darted around us, though searching for an escape. Liam's gut tightened. Years of combat and service had honed his ability to spot anomalies. He could almost feel the tension radiating from the girl. The man's casual smile seemed too calculated, as if he were performing a role he wasn't comfortable with. It wasn't the interracial pairing that stood out. Liam knew better than to let appearances cloud his judgment. But something deeper, an intangible wrongness, set his instincts on edge. He stepped closer under the pretense of buying a drink from the vending machine. His hand fumbled for change, but his ears remained sharp, listening to the interaction between the man and the girl. "You're excited for your first day at the new school, aren't you, sweetheart?" the man said, his voice forced into a sing-song cadence. The girl's reply was barely a whisper. "Yes, Daddy." Liam paused, his hand freezing midair. The way she said Daddy wasn't natural. It was practiced, coached. He glanced at the businessman still buried in his phone, and then at the janitor, who seemed oblivious to the scene. No one else appeared to notice. Liam turned back to the vending machine and deliberately chose the loudest option, a can of soda that dropped with a loud clang. As he turned back to the platform, the man's eyes briefly met his. For a split second, Liam saw something behind the stranger's carefully constructed expression. Fear, anger. "Good morning," Liam said casually, offering a nod. The man hesitated before returning the gesture, his grip tightening on the girl's wrist. "Morning. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Liam offered a polite smile, but said nothing, his attention shifting to the girl. Her eyes flicked to him, wide and pleading, before darting back down to the scuffed tiles of the platform. The train's arrival echoed through the tunnel, breaking the silence. Liam stepped aside to let the others board first. The man gently tugged the girl's arm, leading her toward the nearest door. The girl hesitated, her small feet dragging as though trying to stall. Liam noticed the subtle resistance and the man's forceful pull. "Everything all right?" Liam asked, his tone laced with casual concern. The man stiffened but forced a chuckle. "First day jitters. You know how kids are." The girl looked up at Liam, her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to speak. Before she could, the man tightened his grip and nudged her forward. "Let's not hold everyone up." Liam didn't move until they were safely inside the train. His stomach churned as he replayed the scene. Maybe he was overthinking it. Maybe it was just a nervous father and his shy daughter. But the girl's eyes, those haunted, terrified eyes, refused to leave his mind. As the train doors closed, Liam took a seat a few rows away from them, his phone in hand. His instincts screamed at him to do something, but his rational mind held him back. If he was wrong, his interference could ruin the man's morning and embarrass him in front of his daughter. But if he was right, Liam stared at his reflection in the subway window, his Marine training battling his lingering self-doubt. His hand hovered over his phone's keypad. He could call it in. A small, discreet report. But what would he say? Suddenly, a faint voice broke through his thoughts. "Stop. Please, stop." Liam's heart jumped. He looked up to see the girl pulling against the man's grip, her voice barely audible over the train's hum. The man leaned down, whispering something into her ear. She froze immediately, her face paling. It was a quiet but effective show of dominance. Liam stood, his mind made up. He wasn't going to let this go. He moved toward the door leading to the next car, keeping his pace slow and deliberate. His heart pounded as he replayed the girl's desperate whisper in his mind. If his instincts were wrong, he'd deal with the consequences. But if they were right, he pushed open the door, stepping into the next car, where the man and the girl sat. It was time to act. The subway struggle. The train rattled through the darkened tunnels, its fluorescent lights flickering rhythmically as it sped toward the next station. Liam Carter stepped into the subway car, where the man and the young girl were seated. He kept his posture casual, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. The man sat stiffly, the girl beside him trembling ever so slightly. She clutched the straps of her oversized backpack, her fingers white from the pressure. The man glanced up, catching sight of Liam as he entered the car. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he quickly masked it with a forced smile. Liam returned the look, his expression neutral, and found a seat 2 rows behind them. From this vantage point, he could observe without being obvious. Liam pulled out his phone and pretended to scroll, but his attention was locked on the pair. The man leaned down and murmured something to the girl. She nodded but didn't meet his eyes. Her shoulders were hunched, as if she were trying to make herself as small as possible. The unease Liam had felt earlier solidified into certainty. Something was wrong. This wasn't a case of a nervous child and an overprotective parent. It was more sinister, more deliberate. The train car was nearly empty, save for a young couple at the far end and an older woman asleep with her purse clutched tightly against her chest. No one else seemed to notice the tension radiating from the man and the girl. No one except Liam. Suddenly, the girl's small voice broke through the monotonous hum of the train. "I don't want to go," she whispered, her words trembling like leaves in the wind. Liam's grip on his phone tightened. The man's hand darted to her arm, squeezing it tightly enough to make the girl flinch. "Enough," he hissed under his breath, his tone sharp and menacing. Liam stood, moving casually down the aisle. As he approached, he pretended to glance out the window, his reflection offering a clear view of the man's face. The man noticed him and leaned closer to the girl, his grip never loosening. "Everything all right here?" Liam asked, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. The man turned, his smile strained. "Oh yes, she's just a little upset about school." He glanced at the girl, his expression darkening slightly. "Aren't you, sweetheart?" The girl didn't respond. She stared down at her lap, her hands twisting the straps of her backpack. Liam crouched slightly to meet her eye level. "You okay, kiddo? You don't look too excited about school." The man's body stiffened, and his eyes narrowed. "She's fine. Really, just shy around strangers." Liam ignored him, focusing on the girl. "What grade are you in?" he asked gently. The girl glanced up at him, her blue eyes wide and brimming with tears. "Second," she whispered. The man's grip on her arm tightened again. "All right, enough of this," he said, his voice rising slightly. "We don't need to bother the nice man. Let's just—" "Her arm," Liam interrupted, his voice suddenly firm. His eyes locked onto the man's hand, which was pressing into the girl's tiny arm with unnecessary force. You're gripping her pretty hard." The man blinked, taken aback. "What? No, I'm just—" "Let her go," Liam said, standing to his full height. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. The man hesitated, his eyes darting around the nearly empty car. For a moment, he seemed to consider his options. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, he released the girl's arm and patted her shoulder awkwardly. "Sorry. Didn't realize I was holding her so tight." Liam didn't buy the act for a second. He stepped back, giving the pair some space, but his eyes never left them. The girl glanced up at him again, and for a brief moment, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something. Instead, she pressed them together and looked away. The train began to slow as it approached the next station. Liam's mind raced. If the man got off here, he might lose them. But if he followed too closely, he risked spooking the man and putting the girl in more danger. He needed a plan. The train screeched to a halt, and the doors slid open. The man stood, tugging the girl to her feet. "Come on, let's go," he said, his tone clipped. Liam waited a beat, then followed. He kept his distance, blending into the small crowd disembarking at the station. The man led the girl through the station with purposeful strides, his hand once again gripping her arm. As they approached the exit, Liam quickened his pace. "Hey," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise of the station. The man froze, his shoulders tensing. Slowly, he turned to face Liam, a forced smile plastered on his face. "Can I help you with something?" "Yeah," Liam said, his voice calm but firm. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The man's smile faltered. "Misunderstanding? About what?" "About who you are," Liam replied, his eyes narrowing. "And who she is." The girl's eyes darted between the two men, her fear palpable. The man's jaw tightened, and his free hand curled into a fist. "You don't know what you're talking about," the man said, his voice low and threatening. Liam took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "Maybe, but I'm not going anywhere until I know she's safe." The man's nostrils flared, and for a moment, it looked like he might lash out. But then he glanced around, noticing the few bystanders who were starting to pay attention. With a frustrated growl, he released the girl's arm. "Fine," he snapped. "You want to play hero. Be my guest, but you'll regret it." He turned and stormed off, disappearing into the crowd. Liam immediately knelt in front of the girl, his hand steady but his heart pounding. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated, then nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Liam placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now, I promise." But as he led her toward the station's security office, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The man's parting words echoed in his mind, a chilling reminder that danger was still lurking. And Liam knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't rest until the girl was truly safe. The truth unfolds. The sharp chill of the air outside the subway station bit at Liam Carter's face as he stepped onto the bustling city streets. The girl, Karina, clutched his hand tightly, her small frame trembling despite the morning sun that had begun to break through the clouds. Her fear was palpable, and it fueled Liam's growing resolve. The man might have walked away for now, but Liam knew predators like him didn't give up easily. Liam looked down at Karina, her wide blue eyes scanning the unfamiliar faces in the crowd. "You're doing great," he said gently. "We're almost somewhere safe." She nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. "He said he'd come back," she whispered, her voice so faint Liam had to lean closer to hear. Her words sent a surge of anger through him. Liam had spent years in the Marines, standing against threats to innocent lives. He couldn't let this man harm her, or anyone else. They entered a small cafe near the station, its warm, welcoming atmosphere a stark contrast to the tension that hung between them. Liam guided Karina to a quiet corner booth and waved down the waitress, asking for a cup of hot chocolate and a coffee for himself. When the drinks arrived, Liam pushed the steaming mug toward her. "Drink up," he said. "It'll help you feel better." Karina hesitated but eventually lifted the cup with trembling hands. Liam watched her closely, his mind racing. He needed answers, information that could help the authorities stop the man before he found another victim. But he also didn't want to push Karina too hard. She was just a child, already overwhelmed. Liam leaned forward, his voice soft and steady. "Karina, can you tell me about him? The man who was with you?" Her hands tightened around the mug, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "He's not my dad." The confirmation sent a chill through Liam. "I didn't think so," he said carefully. "Do you know his name?" She shook her head. "He never told me. He just started showing up at the subway station." "How long ago?" Liam asked, keeping his tone gentle. "A few weeks," she said. "At first, he just talked to me. He said he was a friend of my dad's, that he wanted to make sure I was okay." "And your mom?" Liam asked. "Does she know about him?" Karina hesitated, her lower lip trembling. "No, I didn't tell her. He said it would make her mad at me." Liam felt a surge of anger but forced himself to stay calm. "It's not your fault," he said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. He's the one who lied." Karina nodded, tears spilling over her cheeks. "He said my dad asked him to take care of me, because he's gone." The weight of her words hit Liam like a punch to the gut. He leaned back, his mind spinning. The man had been grooming her, building her trust, weaving a web of lies to isolate her from anyone who could protect her. "Karina," Liam said, leaning forward again, "when he said he wanted to take care of you, what did he mean?" She hesitated, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. He said he wanted to take me home, that I'd be safer with him." Liam's blood ran cold. "Did he say when?" Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "Today." Liam sat back, his mind racing. The man had been planning to abduct her, and if Liam hadn't intervened on the train, he might have succeeded. He felt a renewed surge of determination. The man might have escaped for now, but Liam wasn't about to let him get away with this. "Listen to me," Liam said, his voice firm but kind. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you. But I need to call some people who can help us make sure he never bothers you again. Is that okay?" Karina nodded hesitantly. "Will they tell my mom?" "Yes," Liam said. "But that's a good thing. Your mom loves you, Karina. She'll want to know what happened so she can protect you." Karina looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't mean to make her mad. I didn't know what to do." Liam reached across the table and gently took her hand. "You've been really brave," he said. "And now it's my job to make sure you stay safe." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his voice steady as he relayed the situation. He provided a detailed description of the man, his behavior, and the events on the train. The dispatcher assured him that officers would be dispatched immediately and that someone would be sent to contact Karina's mother. When Liam hung up, he looked back at Karina. "The police are on their way," he said. "They're going to help us." Karina nodded, her small frame still trembling. "What if he comes back?" Liam's jaw tightened. "He won't. I'll make sure of it." The cafe door swung open, and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Liam stood, signaling to them. They approached quickly, their professional demeanor shifting slightly when they saw Karina. "Are you the one who called this in?" one of the officers asked. Liam nodded. "Lance Corporal Liam Carter. I saw him with her on the train. Something didn't sit right, so I followed them." The officers exchanged a glance before one of them knelt beside Karina. "Hi there," she said gently. "My name's Officer Morales. Can you tell me your name?" Karina glanced nervously at Liam, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Karina," she said softly. Officer Morales smiled. That's a pretty name. Do you feel safe with this man? She gestured to Liam. Karina nodded. He saved me, she whispered. Liam felt a lump form in his throat at her words. Thank you, Corporal Carter, Officer Morales said, standing. We'll take it from here. Liam hesitated. I'd like to stay until her mother arrives. She's been through a lot. The officers exchanged another glance, then nodded. All right, the second officer said. But we'll need you to come down to the station later to give a full statement. Of course, Liam said. As they waited, Liam kept close to Karina, offering her quiet reassurances. The girl stayed close to him, her trust in him growing with each passing moment. When Karina's mother arrived, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear, she pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. Tears streamed down her cheeks as Karina sobbed into her shoulder. I'm so sorry, Mom, Karina whispered. I didn't know what to do. Her mother held her tightly, rocking her gently. It's okay, baby, she said. You're safe now. That's all that matters. Liam stood back, giving them space. When Karina's mother finally turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude, she said, Thank you. Thank you for saving my little girl. Liam nodded, his voice quiet. Just doing my duty. But as he watched the tearful reunion, Liam knew this wasn't the end. The man was still out there, and Liam wouldn't rest until he was brought to justice. The predator's shadow. The bustling activity in the police precinct was a sharp contrast to the quiet dread simmering inside Lance Corporal Liam Carter. Seated across from Detective Evelyn Harrington, a sharp-eyed woman with decades of experience in child exploitation cases, Liam relayed the events of the morning. Every detail, from the moment he first spotted Karina and the man on the subway platform to her tearful confession in the cafe, spilled out in clear, precise sentences. Detective Harrington nodded as she took notes, her expression growing grimmer with each passing moment. You've done good work, Carter, she said finally, her voice steady but laced with tension. But I don't think this guy is going to go quietly. Predators like him rarely do. Liam leaned forward, his jaw tight. What do we know about him? She flipped through her notes. Not much yet. Karina's description matches reports we've had about a man lingering around subway stations and school zones for weeks. He's careful though. Never stays in one place too long. Avoids security cameras. We've been calling him the Watcher. Liam's gut churned. The idea of this man watching other children, biding his time until he could strike, was sickening. He's been planning this, Liam said, his voice low and filled with conviction. It's not random. He's a predator, and Karina wasn't going to be his only victim. Harrington nodded. That's exactly why we need to move fast. We're pulling footage from nearby stations and businesses, but it's going to take time. If you're willing, I'd like your help identifying him. Whatever you need, Liam replied without hesitation. Harrington handed him a tablet loaded with grainy surveillance footage from the subway station. Start here. Look for anything familiar. His clothes, his walk, anything that stands out. As Liam sifted through the footage, his mind raced. The Watcher wasn't just a threat to Karina. He was a threat to any child he could isolate. Every second they wasted meant more opportunities for him to find another target. Here, Liam said suddenly, pausing the clip. The grainy video showed a man in a denim jacket entering the station. His movements were deliberate, calculated, as if he were scanning the area for something or someone. That's him, Liam said, his finger tapping the screen. I bet my life on it. Harrington leaned over, her eyes narrowing. Good catch. Let's see where he goes. The video followed the man as he moved through the station, his head turning slightly as he passed groups of commuters. Then he stopped, his attention locking onto a small child holding hands with their mother. Liam's stomach turned as the man lingered for a moment before continuing on. Classic predatory behavior, Harrington muttered, her tone grim. He's assessing potential targets, looking for vulnerabilities. The video continued until the man approached the platform where Liam had first seen him with Karina. He stood near the edge, his eyes scanning the area. And then, there she was. Karina entered the frame, her small backpack bobbing as she walked. The man's entire demeanor shifted. He stepped forward, his movements smooth and calculated, and began speaking to her. Liam clenched his fists as he watched the interaction. The way the man crouched slightly to appear less threatening, the false warmth in his gestures, it was all meticulously planned. That's how he got her to trust him, Liam said, his voice tight. He made it seem like he was a friend, someone safe. Harrington nodded. And once she believed that he had her. At least until you stepped in. The detective's phone buzzed, and she answered it, her expression darkening as she listened. When she hung up, she turned to Liam. We've got a hit. One of the officers at the subway station spotted a man matching the description entering a nearby park. He's wearing different clothes, but the behavior is consistent. Liam stood immediately. Let's go. Harrington hesitated. Carter, you've already gone above and beyond. This is police business now. With all due respect, Detective, Liam said, his voice firm. I'm not standing down. That man targeted a child. If there's a chance to stop him, I'm taking it. Harrington studied him for a moment before nodding. Fine, but you follow my lead. No cowboy moves. The park was quiet, the early afternoon sun casting long shadows over the playground and walking paths. Liam and Harrington moved through the area with a small team of officers, their eyes scanning for any sign of the watcher. Liam's heart pounded as they approached a bench near the playground. A man sat there, his posture relaxed, but his eyes darted around as if cataloging the children playing nearby. He was wearing a different jacket, dark green this time, but Liam recognized him instantly. That's him, Liam said, his voice low but firm. Harrington nodded, signaling to the team. Two officers began to circle around, cutting off any potential escape routes. Liam's adrenaline surged as they approached the man. Harrington stepped forward first, her badge displayed. Sir, we need to ask you a few questions. The man's eyes flicked to her, then to Liam. For a split second, his face registered recognition, and then he bolted. Stop, Harrington shouted, but the man was already sprinting toward the tree line. Liam didn't think, he reacted. His training kicked in as he took off after the man, his powerful strides quickly closing the distance. The world blurred around him, his focus narrowing to the fleeing figure ahead. The man darted into the trees, but Liam was right behind him. He leaped over a fallen log, his muscles straining as he pushed himself harder. The man glanced back, his panic evident, and stumbled. Liam tackled him to the ground in one fluid motion, pinning him with practiced ease. The man struggled, thrashing and spitting curses, but Liam's grip didn't falter. Game's over, Liam growled, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The officers arrived moments later, handcuffing the man and hauling him to his feet. His eyes burned with fury as he glared at Liam. You think this is over? He snarled. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Liam stepped closer, his gaze cold. Oh, I know exactly what I'm dealing with, and so will every officer in this city. As the man was led away, Harrington approached Liam, her expression a mix of relief and respect. You've got good instincts, Carter. I don't know how many kids you might have saved today. Liam nodded, his mind already racing ahead. The watcher was in custody, but the fight wasn't over. There were questions to answer, connections to uncover, and a little girl who still needed protection. For Liam, the mission was far from complete. The silent confessions. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the stark table and the cold metal chair where the man, identified as Victor Salgado, one of his many aliases, sat slumped. His hands were cuffed to the table, and his eyes glinted with a mixture of defiance and anger. Across from him, Detective Evelyn Harrington placed a thick file on the table with deliberate precision. Lance Corporal Liam Carter stood near the door, his arms crossed as he watched silently. The room was heavy with tension. Salgado's capture at the park had sent shockwaves through the precinct. His fingerprints matched those found in multiple unsolved cases involving missing children, and further digging had revealed a network of fake identities. Salgado wasn't just a predator. He was a calculated, organized operator. Harrington leaned forward, her expression calm but unyielding. "Victor Salgado," she began, her voice steady. "Or should I call you Carlos Moreno? Mateo Alvarez? Or one of the dozen other names we found tied to you?" Salgado smirked, his lips curling into a mocking smile. "Call me whatever you like," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "It doesn't change a thing." Harrington's eyes narrowed, but her tone remained even. "You've been targeting children for years. We've got witnesses, fingerprints, and now surveillance footage linking you to multiple attempted abductions. And let's not forget what you tried to do to Karina." At the mention of Karina's name, Salgado's smirk faltered for a split second, a crack in his otherwise confident demeanor. It was brief, but Liam caught it. His fists clenched at his sides, his anger simmering just below the surface. "You don't know anything," Salgado spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you've got it all figured out, but you're just scratching the surface." Harrington didn't flinch. "Then help us understand," she said, her voice deceptively calm. "Tell us why. Tell us how many others there are." Salgado leaned back in his chair, his shackles clinking softly. "Why should I tell you anything? You've already decided I'm guilty." Liam, unable to stay silent any longer, stepped forward. His military training had taught him patience, but this man's arrogance was pushing him to the edge. "You're not in a position to play games," he said, his voice cold. "Every second you sit here in silence, we're uncovering more about you. It's only a matter of time before we find out everything. But if you cooperate, maybe, just maybe, you can salvage what little humanity you have left." Salgado turned his gaze to Liam, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you supposed to be? Some kind of hero?" "No," Liam said firmly, stepping closer. "Just someone who won't let scum like you keep getting away with this." For a moment, the two men locked eyes, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Then Salgado let out a low chuckle. "You think you're better than me," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "But you're not. You don't know what it's like out there, what it takes to survive." "I know enough," Liam shot back. "And I know you prey on the innocent because you're too much of a coward to face anyone who can fight back." Salgado's smirk faltered again, replaced by a flicker of anger. Harrington seized the moment, leaning in. "Victor, this is your chance to make things easier for yourself. We've got you. The evidence is overwhelming. But if you cooperate, if you tell us what we need to know, the DA might be willing to cut you a deal." Salgado's jaw tightened, and for the first time, doubt crept into his expression. He glanced at the file on the table, the weight of his crimes seemingly pressing down on him. But then he shook his head, his defiance returning. "You think I'm scared of you?" he sneered. "You don't scare me. None of this scares me." Harrington sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Then enjoy the time you've got left," she said coolly. "Because once we're done, you won't see the outside world again." She stood, signaling to the officers waiting outside. As they entered to escort Salgado back to his holding cell, Liam turned to Harrington. "What now?" She looked tired but determined. "We keep digging. He'll slip up eventually, or we'll find enough evidence to put him away for life." Liam nodded, but a gnawing feeling of frustration lingered. Salgado's arrogance, his refusal to admit what he'd done, it made Liam's blood boil. But he knew there was still more to do, more pieces to uncover. Back at the precinct, Liam sat in a quiet corner, scrolling through the case files Harrington had shared with him. Each one was a stark reminder of the lives Salgado had tried to destroy. He paused on Karina's file, his chest tightening as he read the details. The thought of what could have happened if he hadn't been there filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. Corporal Carter. He looked up to see Jocelyn Peterson, Karina's mother, standing hesitantly near the doorway. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. "Mrs. Peterson," Liam said, standing. "Is everything all right?" She nodded, though her expression was strained. "I just wanted to thank you again," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Liam shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone should do." Her lips quivered into a faint smile. "You did more than that. You gave her back to me. You gave me another chance to protect her." The emotion in her voice hit Liam harder than he expected. He nodded, unsure of what to say. Jocelyn stepped closer, her hands wringing nervously. "The detective said they caught him. Is it over?" Liam hesitated. "He's in custody, but it's not over yet. They're still building the case against him." Jocelyn's shoulders sagged slightly, but she nodded. "I just want to make sure he never comes near her again." "And he won't," Liam said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." Jocelyn looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said again, "for everything." As she left, Liam sat back down, the weight of the day pressing on him. The battle wasn't over, but as he thought of Karina's smile and her mother's relief, he knew it was a fight worth continuing. The battle within. The early evening sun cast long shadows across the precinct as Lance Corporal Liam Carter leaned against the cool brick wall outside the station. The day had been a whirlwind of tense interrogations, emotional reunions, and the quiet yet heavy realization of just how deep Victor Salgado's depravity ran. Despite the victory of his capture, Liam couldn't shake the storm brewing inside him. He closed his eyes, the sounds of the city fading as his thoughts pulled him inward. Karina's wide, tear-filled eyes flashed in his mind, her whispered words on the train, her trembling hands clutching her backpack. All of it had been a silent plea for someone to notice, to act. The fact that Liam had been there in that moment felt both like fate and a weight he wasn't sure he could bear. The precinct doors swung open, jolting Liam back to the present. Detective Evelyn Harrington stepped out, a stack of files tucked under her arm. She spotted Liam and made her way over, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. "Thought you might still be here," she said, offering a tired smile. Liam straightened, brushing a hand over his buzzed hair. "Couldn't leave just yet. Feels like there's still more to do." Harrington nodded, her expression understanding. "There always is. But you've done a hell of a lot today. Salgado's in custody, Karina's safe, and we've got enough evidence to keep him locked up for a long time." "For a long time," Liam repeated, his voice heavy with doubt. "Not forever." Harrington sighed, her gaze shifting to the bustling street beyond. "It's not perfect, Carter. The system never is. But we got a solid case against him. He won't be walking free anytime soon." Liam shook his head, his jaw tightening. "It's not just him. It's the idea that people like him exist, that they can blend in, prey on kids like Karina, and most of the time, no one even notices. It makes me sick." Harrington studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes softening. "You can't save everyone," she said gently. "But today, you saved one. And for Karina and her mom, that means everything." Liam let her words sink in, but the weight in his chest didn't lighten. He knew Harrington was right, but the thought of the ones he hadn't saved, the ones Salgado had already hurt, gnawed at him. Before Harrington could say more, Liam's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowning as he saw Jocelyn Peterson's name on the screen. "Mrs. Peterson," he answered, his voice immediately alert. "Corporal Carter," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know who else to call. Karina's. She's been crying ever since we got home. She won't tell me what's wrong, but I think she's scared he'll come back." Liam's heart clenched. "He won't," he said firmly. "I promise you, he's not getting anywhere near her again. But I'll come by if that helps." "Would you?" Jocelyn asked, relief flooding her voice. "I think it might." "I'm on my way," Liam said, already moving toward his car. Harrington raised an eyebrow as he passed her. "Everything okay?" "Karina needs reassurance," Liam said simply. "And I'm going to give it to her." Harrington nodded, her respect for him evident. "Go. I'll hold down the fort here." The Petersons' modest apartment was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, its warm lights visible from the street. Liam climbed the steps to their door, his boots scuffing softly against the concrete. Jocelyn opened the door before he could knock, her face a mixture of gratitude and worry. "She's in her room," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "She hasn't said much, but I can tell she's scared." Liam nodded, his expression serious. "I'll talk to her." He made his way to Karina's room, the door slightly ajar. Inside, the little girl sat on her bed, clutching her doll tightly. She looked up as Liam entered, her tear-streaked face lighting up slightly. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "How are you holding up?" Karina shrugged, her small shoulders hunched. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her trembling hands betrayed her words. Liam sat on the edge of her bed, his presence steady and calming. "It's okay to be scared," he said. "What you went through today was really hard. But I want you to know something. He can't hurt you anymore. I made sure of it." Karina looked at him, her blue eyes wide. "But what if he gets out? What if he comes back?" Liam took a deep breath, his heart aching at her fear. "That's not going to happen," he said firmly. "The police have him, and they're going to make sure he stays locked up. And if he ever tried to come near you again, I'd be there to stop him." Karina hesitated, then leaned forward, wrapping her arms around him in a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest, "for saving me." Liam's throat tightened as he returned the hug, his large hands gentle on her small frame. "You're safe now," he said softly, "and I'll always be here if you need me." Later that evening, as Liam prepared to leave, Jocelyn stopped him at the door. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You didn't just save her life today. You gave her hope. You gave us both hope." Liam nodded, his voice quiet but resolute. "She's a strong kid, and she's lucky to have you." As he walked back to his car, the weight in his chest felt a little lighter. The battle against predators like Salgado wasn't over, but for Karina and her mother, it was a new beginning. And for Liam, it was a reminder of why he had chosen a life of service, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Always faithful, always ready. And tonight, at least, that was enough. The drive back to his base was quiet, the hum of the tires on the asphalt blending with Liam Carter's thoughts. The city lights flickered in the distance, a reminder of the countless lives moving on, unaware of the day's events. Liam wasn't looking for recognition or accolades. He'd done what he believed was right. But the image of Karina, clutching her doll and whispering her fears, lingered in his mind. As he pulled into the parking lot of his barracks, Liam sat for a moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel. The weight of the day's events was settling in, an exhausting mix of relief, anger, and a quiet sense of victory. Victor Salgado was behind bars, and Karina was safe, but Liam knew the battle wasn't over. It wasn't just about one predator. It was about a system that allowed them to operate in the shadows, unnoticed until it was almost too late. Liam's phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. He glanced at the screen to see a message from Detective Harrington. "Harrington, got the ball rolling. Salgado is locked up and facing multiple charges. We've connected him to 2 other cases. It's a long road, but we'll get there. Thanks for everything today." Liam typed a quick response. "Liam, it's what needed to be done. Let me know if you need anything else." He pocketed the phone and leaned back in his seat, staring out at the darkened sky. For a moment, he thought of his friend whose funeral he'd attended just days earlier. A fellow Marine who had carried his own battles silently until they became too much. Liam had missed the signs, and the guilt of that loss had weighed heavily on him. But today, he hadn't missed the signs. Today, he'd made a difference. 1 month later, the courtroom was packed, the air tense with anticipation as the judge entered. Liam sat in the back, his uniform sharp, and his posture rigid. He wasn't required to be here, but he had promised himself he would see this through. Jocelyn and Karina sat a few rows ahead, Karina's small hand clutching her mother's tightly. Victor Salgado sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of indifference. But as the prosecution began to lay out the evidence, surveillance footage, testimonies, and the detailed accounts of his predatory behavior, his composure began to crack. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of his defense. Liam's eyes never left Salgado. The man had spent years preying on the innocent, believing he could slit through the cracks of the system. But not this time. This time, justice was catching up to him. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts, a wave of relief swept through the courtroom. Jocelyn broke into quiet tears, holding Karina close, while Liam allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Salgado would never hurt another child again. After the verdict, outside the courthouse, Liam approached Jocelyn and Karina. The little girl's face lit up when she saw him, and she ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You came," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "Of course I did," Liam said, kneeling to her level. "I told you, I'll always be here if you need me." Jocelyn wiped her eyes, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I don't know how to thank you, Corporal Carter. You've been there for us every step of the way." "You don't have to thank me," Liam said. "Just keep being the amazing mom you are. Karina's lucky to have you." Karina looked up at him, her blue eyes shining. "Can I still write you letters?" she asked. Liam chuckled, his heart warming at her innocence. "You'd better. I'll be looking forward to them." As they said their goodbyes, Liam watched them walk away, hand in hand. The burden he'd been carrying since his friend's death felt a little lighter now. He couldn't change the past, but he could honor it by living with purpose, by protecting those who needed it most. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from the Marine Corps, an order to deploy for a training exercise overseas. The work never stopped, and Liam wouldn't have it any other way. He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked toward his car, the weight on his shoulders replaced by a quiet determination. The world was far from perfect, but for Karina and her mom, today was a victory. And for Liam, that was enough. Always faithful, always ready, always human.